Good afternoon, and welcome to Getting Your Network Operations in Order, a complimentary webinar from healthsystemCIO.com. Just some housekeeping before we get started today. My name is Anthony Guerra. I'm the editor-in-chief of healthsystemCIO.com, and I will be your moderator today. We encourage you to ask questions. You can type them in at any time in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, the Q&A box. Leave the default set to all panelists. I'll be taking a look at those and preparing them for our speaker later in the program, but go ahead and send them in when they occur to you. You can download the deck using the URL on your screen. I'll also send it out in the chat box, and there's a shortened URL at the bottom of each slide. And we are recording today's event, so we will have an archive ready, and you'll get an email when it's ready, usually within 2 business days, and a separate registration is required. So you see how we're going to spend our time today. We're going to go 40 to 45 minutes. First, we're going to hear from our speaker, Scott MacLean, Deputy CIO and Director of IS Operations at Partners Healthcare, and then we're going to have our Q&A with Scott. So without further delay, I'm going to turn it over to our good friend, Scott MacLean. Scott, thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much, Anthony, and good day to everyone. I want to set the scene. I know we probably have a representation from various geographies on the webinar. So I'm sitting in the Prudential Center in Boston, which is our corporate headquarters, overlooking the frozen Charles River at MIT. And it's a nicer day here than it has been, but we are coping in Boston, and we thank everyone for their support and relief tax dollars you're sending to us. Anthony, I think I might need the control to switch the slides. Or Nancy, you can progress it for me if you want.
I'll just forward them for you, Scott. We're on your second slide. Let me bring that back to me. Hold on one second.
All righty.
Okay.
Thanks, Anthony.
I'll forward your slides, Scott. So just say next when you're ready.
Very good. So folks, when Anthony asked me to speak about this, he asked me to speak about our data center strategy and also our command center, which we established in the fall of 2013. But I took a step back to think about how things were when I took this role in this job in the fall of 2011. So I've been with the company for a number of years working in some of our hospital sites, but this job I've had since the fall of 2011 is Director of IS Operations, so it's overseeing the core infrastructure, our network, our data centers, and end-user computing support. Part of the mandate coming into this role was to consolidate the various data centers we've had at some of our sites and to make our disaster recovery program more mature. And obviously, like all of us, we want to improve our information security posture. We also knew that we were taking on a new common revenue cycle and clinical system across all of our sites in primary and specialty care, acute and non-acute care, and also that we needed to have high availability for our enterprise resource planning system for email and various other applications. Now, the good news about this is that there was some capital available, but it still felt like a very daunting task. And often in these webinars and presentations that we all participate in, we hear about the good news stories. And we have accomplished a lot here, but it still has not been easy, and we still have a long way to go. You can advance, Anthony. So for those who may not be familiar with us, we are a system here in Boston founded by Brigham and Women's and Mass General. We have our various physician organizations affiliated with the hospitals. We have 9 acute care facilities. We have a significant rehabilitation network, various specialty hospitals for cancer and for mental health that are affiliated. We have a large home care network. And recently, in the last 3 years, we added an insurer, the first time that we as a provider are dipping our toe into the insurance market and are thinking about ways that we can participate in that and combine with our care delivery. So I think people probably know we are in the process of implementing a single clinical and revenue cycle system across the enterprise, as I mentioned, in all the care dimensions. And we are probably coming up on just about being in the middle of that. We are participating in the Federal Pioneer ACO program, and we also, several years ago, re-established all of our commercial contracts to be risk-based. So based on the fact that there was healthcare reform in Massachusetts in 2006, even before the federal healthcare reform law, we have been looking at collaborating our care together and working on population health management and analytics. So even before the federal ACO programs came out, we did a Medicare demonstration project, a shared savings project, and felt like we did pretty well with that using some of the information systems tools that we have. And so we're spending a fair amount of time now maturing those to match up with the new programs and also to utilizing the new revenue cycle and clinical system we're implementing. We also have had in the past and expect fluctuation in our clinical affiliations, meaning there may be hospitals or physician practices that are coming in and out of our network based on the various relationships that we have here in Eastern Massachusetts. And we need to be able to respond to those from an information systems and integration standpoint. Next slide. So I talked a little bit about this. We already had various forms of growth and affiliations. Our strategy, even prior to the healthcare reform, was obviously to have primary and specialty physician practices and community hospitals that support our academic medical centers. And previously, and actually still true today, these various entities that we have are responsible for their own bottom lines, and that makes a difference about how they choose their information systems capabilities and expense. We did have critical coordination amongst these, and we used IS to support the activities, and these all took place, but it wasn't the main focus in a fee-for-service system where these entities had their own bottom lines. At the origin of the company, which is just about 20 years ago, our academic medical centers, they did bring their IS infrastructure together under central management. But what we had was a number of our community hospitals and other facilities who retained their own information systems infrastructure. And this was usually because of expense. And it wasn't always that it was an apples-to-apples comparison. It was a situation where if a community hospital was running an integrated system on site and it was relatively inexpensive to run that data center and to run the servers and storage there, why bring those into the corporate data centers and add the additional expense that we had? And this is really because the corporate data centers were Tier 3 or Tier 3 plus data centers that had all the associated redundancy and high availability that certainly wasn't taking place at some of the community sites. Next slide, Anthony. So about the time that I took on this role, there was an effort and thought to have data center consolidation. And this really came from our board of directors and also from our executive management, believing that we needed to get better around our disaster recovery posture and also for information security purposes that we needed to have more standards around how we hosted our computing platforms. So the carrot was that there was capital funding made available from the corporate office to put in place disaster recovery equipment. But it was also expected that sites were going to cover ongoing operating costs once that was done. And again, this would be an uptick in operating expenses because there really was a difference from the way that they were running it previously. So again, coming into this role and thinking about our data centers, we have and will continue to have, at least for the time being, two primary corporate Tier 3 plus data centers. And one of them is located just west of the city in Needham, Massachusetts, and the other one currently is in Charlestown. The Charlestown facility we had been studying for a number of years, really since about 2003. We had consultants come in no fewer than 3 times to evaluate the facility and give us direction on whether to be able to build a data center somewhere else, outsource or co-locate, various options that might be available that I'm sure many on the call have studied. And coming into this role, I was not convinced that we should build a new facility. I was thinking that we might remediate the Charlestown facility or do something with cloud-based computing or some other co-location option in order to avoid the expense of a new facility. But as we did our studying and thought about our investments and where we wanted to do our computer hosting and the flexibility that we wanted, we came out and did decide to build a new data center, which I will talk about in a moment, show a picture. So that was completed. The new data center was completed in the fall, this past fall of 2014, and we're currently in the process of decommissioning our Charlestown data center and moving equipment to the Marlboro. At the same time, while this new data center was being built, we completed a cloud strategy, which was really done by an independent consultant. It wasn't one of the cloud service providers, but really was looking through all of our different applications and workloads and how they might be best hosted and what opportunities there might be to move them to the cloud. And perhaps like many who are participating today, we have various departmental applications that are using software as a service, web-hosted type applications, and we do have Office 365, but we really haven't moved our critical clinical, revenue, and ERP workloads, or even many clinical departmental systems, to the cloud. We have some business associate agreements with cloud providers, and we have some options of things, of workloads we may move to various cloud providers, but there really hasn't been a lot of that movement yet. Also, because we built this new facility, we have a strategy where we want to run our critical clinical revenue cycle ERP workloads 6 months in one data center and then 6 months in another. And I want to stress we haven't done that yet. We have disaster recovery capability between our two current corporate data centers, but this notion of doing well at running in one facility and then having the operational changeover to run 6 months in another has not yet been completed, but that is what we're setting up for. So there's high availability in both data centers, and then this notion of flipping back and forth is something we'll begin executing probably next year. And then this question that probably everyone has is, do we want to be in the data center business? So while we will have two flagship facilities where we can do this 6 months in each, we're looking ahead to see what workloads could be done in the cloud and whether it would be feasible to operate with eventually one or no data centers. But that seems to be a long way off. So at the moment, we are in the data center business and are fortunate to have these two facilities. Anthony? So here's a picture of the recently completed new data center, state-of-the-art, Tier 3 plus. It does not meet all of the requirements for Tier 4, but it is more than Tier 3. And this is located in Marlboro, so we're happy to have both of our facilities a little further back away from Massachusetts Bay and the LNG tanker terminal that's near our Charlestown facility today. This is a terrific facility. We're lucky to have it, and as I say, we are outfitting it today. It's actually operational today, and we are moving all the workloads from Charlestown. Expect to have that done by this summer. Next slide. Thanks, Anthony. So this gives you a picture about what I've been talking about and how we are trying to move our various data centers around. So on the left side, there is a picture of our Needham data center, and on the right side, our Charlestown. On the bottom, the new Marlboro data center. And then we still show some community sites because even though we have consolidated many of our community data centers, there are still some that need to be done. And then there is that dynamic that I talked about, that there are clinical affiliations happening as we step through the years and months that pass by. And we show the cloud here because we do have some applications and workloads in the cloud. Again, it's pretty limited at the moment, but we are stepping through all of our information security processes, business associate agreements, and service levels to test the waters on what we can do well in the cloud. And we certainly think that we have a very big research operation. We certainly think that some of our research workloads can be hosted there, and non-production QA test development type workloads can also be done there. So the footprints of these data centers, they may continue to exist except for Charlestown, but the footprints may get smaller as we put more things in the cloud. And of course, at the moment, we're still growing compute and storage in our data centers, so the more things that we can decant from them and safely put in the cloud, that leaves room for new applications coming in. Next slide. So again, we have some recent affiliations. One of them is our insurer that came in, and any new clinical or business affiliation comes in with awareness about collaboration and how we want to work together and meet the various clinical integration needs and the need for information security. But I think we still suffer from what I might call not-for-profit niceness. We are not at the point where when we acquire or merge with a new business unit that we act immediately or in a 3 to 6 month period in integrating information systems. And that just, I think, is the culture of the types of organizations we're dealing with. The CIOs of these new systems or new entities that come in and our CIO have opportunity for input, but the various organizational structures and business priorities do slow the integration timelines. And I think this at least in my experience in healthcare IT, this has a lot to do with many executives still looking at IT as a black box and not wanting to be troubled by it. And so if you have a local CIO who may be saying, hey, to their CEO, hey, we need to take charge of our own destiny with IT, and if you move it over to the corporate side, you may not get the service you need, or it may be very expensive. And some of those things, while may be true in pockets, generally we're trying to follow a strategy where we're consolidating most of these things. It just takes more time. Next slide, Anthony. So moving on to our command center, here's a picture of what the room looks like. As you can probably tell by looking at the long view, and then the small picture at the bottom right is just the side to the left of the screens where the controls are for the screens. This is simply a not even very big conference room that we repurposed to build this command center. And so there's room for 8 staff to sit in here full time. And you see the screens in the front, which I'll describe a little bit more in a moment. And then we have ongoing weather and news television feeds on the left and right of those screens. And on the left side of the room, the bottom right picture, there's also a fold-down conference table for small meetings. And then the room is wired for audio, obviously, for conference calling and discussion. And then we couldn't find a room that was adjacent to this for a, quote, war room, but we repurposed another conference room across the way that has the same feed of these screens for executives or other decision makers to huddle if there is an incident happening. Next slide. So I'm guessing that people on the line probably have a pretty good idea about objectives of command centers, network operations centers, or security operations centers. And the idea, obviously, is to have subject matter experts on hand, working together, collaborating, and doing monitoring and support. The idea is to really reduce mean time to detection and mean time to repair. And obviously, we want to do this in a way that supports our business best in the clinical and revenue areas. So like most organizations, we have our end users, we have our service desk, help desk, we have various monitoring tools, and we have been trying to adopt the information technology infrastructure library, IT service management frameworks. So you see these names, incident management, event management, change management, and problem management are probably familiar to people as ITIL terms. And we are in the process of maturing in all of those areas. The command center monitors events. These are alerts that we get from our various infrastructure and applications that are not yet disrupting business flow. Incident, of course, is when an event turns into a downtime or some service being offline. We all know as information systems professionals that change management is critical to keeping our systems available, and so we spend a lot of time working on our change management processes, discussing that together, having a change management review meeting every week, and trying to keep our configuration management database clean, tying all of our infrastructure and applications together, and that's definitely a work in process. And then the problem management process is when we have an incident, any major incident goes to our problem management. It's a relatively small team at the moment, but those are the folks that work on root cause and publish changes in our knowledge base about how things should be handled in the future. So that's the view, the objective of the command center. Next slide. So here's the video wall, and I don't have a pointer, but I'll just go from the top left across the top here and say the dedicated eCare console. Partners eCare is our name for our enterprise revenue cycle and clinical application that we're implementing. So that monitors the infrastructure components of that application. The 4 screens in the middle are the main console view, and these show the events and incidents that the team is monitoring. The upper right for storage, a dedicated console for that. Lower left is the Cisco transport controller. This shows the network and all of the movements of the network, and I'll tell a story about that in a moment. And then the lower right is any active alarms that we're working on with associated tickets. And you can see that there's also we're using Link to connect the command center to our service desk. Next slide. So here's a functional view, and this is drawn from a series of various slides that we have. I've just picked one where we want to get to, which is that we would resolve 90% or 90% plus of our events or incidents within the command center. And this speaks to the fact that we would like to know what events and incidents happened before our end users call us and tell us about them. So if you just look around this diagram, you see various disciplines that are working within the command center, but also the tier 2 and 3 support folks that are outside the command center that might be co-located nearby, working on various disciplines. And then also to the right, the ERP system, Partners eCare, the clinical and revenue cycle system, pods where application support folks can interact with the command center and respond to events and incidents. We also have a tie-in with our security operations center and our managed security services provider. So we are running all of those feeds together and collaborating on security events as well. Next slide. So here's just an example of how the command center helped us out last summer. So last summer we didn't have all this snow in Boston, but we did have, if you look at the lower right here, you see a large I-beam being driven into the ground for a construction project. And they managed to hit a major fiber conduit that had 288 strands in it. And so the command center helped us out because the alert went off right away to show us that the incident had happened, and then the smarts system that we have from EMC alerted the remote sites that were affected. We were also very lucky to have redundancy and either have automatic failovers, or in the case of where we needed to work with failovers, we did so because of being able to monitor all this centrally. And so you see the timeline in the middle of the page here about how we responded to the event, and we're relatively unaffected by such a major event. Next slide. All right. So at this point, I think, Anthony, we'd like to take any questions that people have and have a discussion about these items.
Very good. Well, thank you, Scott, for that presentation. I have a question that's come in. When you talk about research data, is there more resistance to storing that information in the cloud? And if so, how did you manage that?
So this is an ongoing process, and I wouldn't say that there's more resistance to storing that in the cloud. I think that probably what we consider our crown jewels are our clinical data and associated revenue cycle, and then ERP, our employee payroll data and things like that. So I mentioned research because I think there are workloads that are de-identified and not so sensitive that the research groups are beginning to look at options that are less expensive and also more flexible for collaboration outside of partners as well. So I think that there are some good research workload candidates for looking at the various cloud providers first.
Okay. What about location? You showed the picture of the building. You said you mentioned it was away from the bay and these type of things. You know, on the extreme end, we know about, you know, NORADs in a mountain. What are the considerations that come in when you're looking at a physical location?
Sure. So this is where we spent a lot of time studying before we made the decision to build this new facility in Marlborough, which is a little further west of the city than the Needham facility. So we actually looked at hosting with other, I guess you would call them cloud providers now. We looked at if we were to build this facility in a place where electricity is less expensive. And at the time we looked at all of these things, it became clear that there were various, you know, we're a not-for-profit here in Massachusetts, but there were various tax implications of building somewhere else. There were also WAN costs that drove up the, you know, overrode the savings that we got from building somewhere else and having less expensive electricity. So based on the fact that we are a regional company and we felt that the best options for us were to have these two relatively close facilities but separated enough for regional disaster events, that was the best choice.
Okay. Is your strategy coupled with a movement towards virtualization at the server and desktop level, and do you manage the life of data in your system well?
So I would say that the virtualization strategy preceded these more recent efforts at data center consolidation and the effort to build a new data center. So I would say we're pushing 80% or more server virtualization of what can be virtualized. There are obviously some servers and workloads that can't be virtualized. In terms of utilization of virtualization of applications, we have reason to be using Citrix for significant workloads, for using Zen app, which is the server-side virtualization. In terms of virtual desktop infrastructure, we have experimented with that for certain applications and use cases. That is not widespread at the moment, but we can see increasing cases where that will come into play and be helpful for us. And in terms of managing the life cycle of data, do we do it well? Well, we are a significant research institution, and we tend to keep a lot of data. We have been working hard in the last couple of years to have an appropriate data retention policy, and so we are actually entering into a process improvement project now where we hope to get better at getting rid of things that we shouldn't keep, both electronic and paper. And this all goes together as well with a new administrative facility we're building and consolidating locations. So there's incentive from various vectors to get better at that.
Very good. What tools do you have to monitor cloud solutions, i.e. visibility for Office 365?
That's a good question, and maybe we can get a little more detail about what the question asker is trying to get at. In terms of performance with Office 365, we have your typical internet bandwidth monitoring tools, because obviously our pipes to the internet are critical for that, although many Office 365 functions act locally on the desktop, Office Pro Plus, for example. You don't need the cloud connectivity for that. We have not moved Exchange to the cloud yet. We still have Exchange on-prem. And in terms of monitoring how the application is actually working, people who are familiar with Office 365 probably know that there are various telemetry tools that come along with Office 365, and those are certainly ones we're using to the extent we've implemented it so far. I should add that we are early on in the adoption of Office 365. There's not very significant penetration at the moment for the size of company that we are.
Okay, great. Do you have an automated failover process for key systems? Do you still do the legacy disaster recovery elements such as tape backup stored off-site, or has this new strategy supplanted that?
It's a good question, and it's multi-layered depending on what the application is. So I guess to answer quickly, we still do tape offsite storage, but we have 4 copies of our most critical data, the production copy in each data center, and then a digital backup in each data center, and then snapshots are taken to go offsite. So that's how we handle that. In terms of being able to have automated failover, it depends on where the component is. So in the infrastructure, in the network gear, server storage, there are obviously high availability failover components. In terms of applications, we really don't have, and people probably know this, there are very few really truly active applications out there. Most require some sort of intervention. And so we have an active situation with our voice over IP telephony. We have some active interaction with our Exchange and Outlook email system. And then parts of our clinical and revenue cycle system can be active, although without naming specific vendors, there's an underlying technology with that system that requires intervention. So when we do the switchover for disaster recovery or just to exercise the equipment in the opposite data center, there will be some downtime and operational work that needs to be done both on the technical side and from the user perspective.
Very good. Are there any systems that are still maintained at the community sites, and what IT staff besides desktop technicians still reside at the community hospitals?
Sure. Well, there definitely are systems and infrastructures that remain at the community sites and even at the academic sites. And people can probably imagine that there are MDF rooms at these sites, and also there are certain pieces of biomedical equipment and other systems that need to be proximate to where the hospital operation is taking place. In terms of our staffing model, it is in a process of transition as we are moving from, various disparate systems that we're taking care of. At some of our community hospitals, there was a whole technology stack from infrastructure up through applications that were maintained by a local IS group. And so as we move through implementing our new clinical and revenue cycle system, many of those systems are quote, going away from the local site, although there are, as you imagine, downstream systems that are still local. You can think of clinical departmental systems and other site-specific things that need to be there. So there's a combination of those still remaining at the local site. Many of them are being moved to the corporate data centers if they don't need to be proximate to the site. And I would say it's going to be a period of time as we move from having perhaps all disciplines at local sites to being in more of a business and clinical analytic role, representing what the site's needs are for enterprise systems like our ERP system and our clinical revenue cycle system.
Very good. When, if ever, do you see partners moving entirely to a cloud-based solution?
We've thought about it, and we've had a lot of internal discussions about it. It's far enough out that I wouldn't put a date to it. It's not going to be this decade. So I would say it's post-2020. I would hope by 2020 we are hosting significant workloads in the cloud, and we will all see, or hosting them offsite at some other vendor that's taking care of them. All of us will see how this proceeds. I think a lot of it depends on cost, obviously, and if, frankly, can a cloud vendor take care of things from an information security perspective better than on-prem, and all of us will see how those vectors go in the coming years, and we'll make decisions accordingly.
Next question, what type of budget increase was necessary to accomplish or move towards your goals? The fact that you had board and management team support is great.
Sure. Well, specifically with the new data center and the command center, the data center consolidation of the smaller sites and the disaster recovery equipment. So I'll take these things differently. In terms of budget for, and understand that Partners as a system, as a parent, gets all of its money from the revenues produced from the site. So it's the site's money that then gets managed and redistributed. So the data center consolidation budget and the disaster recovery for the smaller sites was put forth by our enterprise CFO in order to help these smaller sites be able to improve the disaster recovery and information security posture, and there certainly was board support of that as well. And I would say that the haves subsidize the have-nots in that, because we obviously have some sites that do better than others, and that's where that money came from. In terms of the new data center in Marlborough, west of the city, that again was a multi-year study to decide to invest in building that facility, and certainly required board finance committee. Our CIO went multiple times to the board to request money for that project, and was scrutinized about every aspect of it. All the questions that were asked here and many more in terms of redundancy and WAN connectivity, power sourcing, location, whether it could be done by co-location. And so that took probably, in addition to the 7 years of study we put into it, probably took another 1.5 years to justify, and that was funded by the corporation and our various debt structures. And then in terms of the command center, we built that by saving capital in our network engineering budget and various other budgets over multiple years. It actually, our director of network engineering had been working on this for the better part of a decade, trying to position us to be able to execute on it.
These are amazing timelines you're talking about, almost like you think of NASA folks working on projects where they may come to fruition in 10, 15, 20 years. And you mentioned, the end of the decade. Talk about that from a leadership management point of view. Is there a different dynamic when you're working on things that are that long term?
Well, I think it's I think one does have to be persistent and have vision and stick at it, because obviously all of us have many daily operational duties that are happening all the time, and there's not always funding. But I think what we put our minds to was that for a company of our size and what we're trying to, the way we're trying to serve our mission, the clinical care, the research, the teaching, and improving our community's health, these are worth doing. And particularly if we're going to have now a monolithic revenue and clinical system for all of our care facilities, we need to have the very best data center, compute storage facilities, high availability, disaster recovery, backups, and then to the command center to be able to monitor that. And so, it is just taken, also we've been, as I described in the beginning, we've been a company that's made up of several different institutions with their own bottom lines. And now, based on the healthcare reform locally and federally, and people moving towards looking at populations and paying for health, really changes in the payment system, we are wanting to work together more. And this puts us in a place where we really need to drive to collaborate more and utilize these facilities. So it's a combination of things that comes together, and it does take a lot of patience and waiting out timelines.
Next question, what was the biggest lesson learned in dealing with the fiber cut? Or was there anything about that which surprised you regarding the redundancy efforts?
Well, I think it's pretty shocking to have an event like this happen, and it was these are as a public construction site and public fiber that, they managed to hit, I can't even remember, but you've got various fiber providers running through that hole, and they managed to hit several of them, and yet our redundancy, the fact that we'd invested in redundancy, allowed us to be able to either fail over quickly or automatically cut over. So I think the lesson learned from that command center slide is that we would have had a lot more difficult time trying to figure out what was going on by having reports from remote sites, getting calls from vendors or various individual folks looking at monitoring equipment, whereas when the event happened, having those disciplines together in the command center allowed us to have a better, more efficient response. And I guess the other thing I should mention is that we're not yet staffed 24/7 in the command center. So our CIO has said that we can't have any incidents or events off hours, but he says that jokingly. We do have a 24/7 service desk, and we are looking to balance our staffing. And the command center response off hour is through pager, which is how we did it before we had the facility.
Any advice you could give the people listening? Any sort of key decision points come to mind? And if you're this type of organization, you may want to go that way. If you're another type of organization, you may want to go the other way. Any advice you can give, maybe generalize a few different scenarios and help give folks some idea of how they might move forward in making these big decisions?
I think it's probably what people would guess. I mean, my estimation is that if we were a smaller and less complex facility, that we wouldn't be building these types of functions, and we would be partnering with other folks or cloud providers for data center facilities or outsourcing a command center for monitoring those kinds of things. So I think it really depends on the type of organization that you have. We're in a situation where we're very complex and had a very clear business mandate for the common clinical revenue cycle system and for population health management and analytics, that is how we're going to be able to meet our mission. And so, and I also think what I mentioned about, I think a lot of healthcare executives really don't yet look at IT as a differentiator. And I compare that to other businesses that have done this outside of healthcare that have really leveraged IT as a differentiator. So I think being persistent about making the case for why one needs high availability, redundancy, monitoring, why investments need to be made in core facilities for hosting, that's a case that CIOs need to make day in and day out.
Very good. Well, I think that is about all we had time for today. I want to thank you very much, Scott, for your presentation and answering the questions. I think we had a lot of value for folks today. As I mentioned, you'll receive an email when our archive is ready, usually within 2 business days, and a separate registration is required. If you hold the CHIME CIO certification, please be sure to let CHIME know you attended. Attending any of our webinars gets you 1 CEU, and if you've asked us to let CHIME know, we will. Questions, comments, you can email me, and you can go to our website to see our past 12 months of archived events and our upcoming calendar. So once again, I want to thank Scott and thank our attendees, and everybody have a wonderful day.